Let's bring in our guests now. In Los Angeles, we have Peter Matthews, a professor of political science and international relations at Cyprus College. In Canberra, Michael Shoebridge, the director of the Defence Strategy and National Security Program at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And in Beijing, we have Einar Tangen, a China political and economic affairs commentator specialising in Beijing. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Einar, from a Chinese perspective, this partnership is a way to counter Beijing's growing influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Is this AUKUS likely to change Beijing's behaviour at all?
This is just going back to colonial era gunboat diplomacy with a little Cold War era Soviet type of sauce put on top of it. The real issue here is I wonder how the people in ASEAN, the different countries there, are viewing this. Earlier in your piece, you talked about the U.S. representative said that China was violating the international norms, imposing its will on people. It's kind of ironic. Is the U.S. and Great Britain talking about this after what's happened in Afghanistan and in the Middle East? I think, as far as Beijing's concerned, it's an age of hypocrisy, self-righteous hypocrisy. And it's not going to change their behavior. They're going to continue to do what they do, and it's going to be more in trade and less in terms of trying to match everything with this kind of war games mentality.
I do want to get to the timing of this pact shortly, but Michael, what's your reaction to what Einar said, and does this pact make strategic sense for Australia?
Well, I think a lot of what we heard is really distraction. It's like magic is all about misdirection. Beijing has been the master at saying it's everybody else's actions, not ours, that are causing the environment. But it's quite clear that Beijing's coercive use of its military and its maritime militia and its growing military power has led to this reaction and this powerful response that's creating a credible deterrence. So let's get away from distractions about, is this some kind of blender mix of the Soviet approach and imperialism, and see it as a real hard power response to Beijing's use of hard power. That's what this is about. And it does reset the military balance, not in Beijing's favour. And I think that's why we're hearing these strange, angry reactions from Beijing.
Come on. I mean, the U.S. has 72 nuclear-powered attack submarines. China has 6. They're now enlisting Australia at the tune of about $3.4 billion apiece for a Virginia attack submarine with all the goodies. And that doesn't even begin to include what it's going to cost by the end of 10 years. We're planning to get more than a few of them. Given that your military budget is about $35 billion a year, you're going to be committing a tremendous amount into that. This thing that somehow it's all self-righteous nonsense. I mean, why would China close down the sea lanes? They get 80% of their oil, 40% goes through the sea lanes. How would that actually work? It would be pure suicide. So all this stuff about balancing and marbles in your mouth about, this isn't, this is a credible deterrent is nonsense. This is an economic war. Australia doesn't have a foreign policy of its own and is just relying on the U.S., which is only concerned with being king of the hill, making sure that it has the hegemony and keeping China away. Ironically, China isn't interested in the hegemonic power that everyone says that it wants.
Peter, I'll bring you in here. Your reaction?
It had both really good points from different perspectives, of course.
Michael, how important is it for Australia to clarify its national interest in all of this?
Well, I think that's pretty clear right now. As we speak, Beijing is actively, by central policy direction, coercing Australia through trade around $20 billion of annual trade. That's direct coercive decision-making from Beijing. And the other big problem that Beijing has and why its trust globally is collapsing is this enormous gap between its words and actions. So we hear, why on earth would Beijing want to constrain maritime passage through the South China Sea, right at the time when China has empowered its heavily armed Coast Guard to use lethal force wherever it claims jurisdiction, which is a great expanse of the South China Sea, and where it's now requesting information from vessels transiting through regions that aren't its. So this word-action gap has led to this collapse in trust, and really this strengthening of military deterrence in the region is welcomed quietly by much of the region, but not by Beijing.
Einar, how likely is China going to use this alliance to justify expanding its own military?
Well, I don't see that China is going to be putting more effort than it already is into its military budget. There could be calls from, yes, I can. There might be calls from the war hawks to try to enhance budget. That happens in any country. At the juncture that China announced, not in return to this, but recently, that is going to try to join the former TPP. So I think China's response is going to be economic. In terms of Australia, this idea that Australia is being constrained, actually, its monetary account is better than ever due to iron ore exports to China. There are other areas that have been affected and will.
Gentlemen, do you have any?
I think there is real room to clarify the understanding that we have of each other, because there is a tendency for talking past each other here. And some of that can be improved by a little more self-reflection, I think. Certainly, Beijing knows it's breaking World Trade Organization rules with its coercive economic behavior against Australia. And we've heard the motivations. They're things like the fact that Australia would like to know how a global pandemic started so that we can prevent future ones. So this is all public knowledge, directly traced back to Beijing's statements and actions. And a little bit of acknowledgement of the gap between words and actions would be a starting point for dialogue.
Okay, let's put the politics to a side now. I want to talk to you, gentlemen, about the nuclear-powered submarines themselves. And specifically, Michael, I want to talk to you about some of the concerns around that. Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, said Australia is not seeking to acquire nuclear weapons or establish a civil nuclear capability. I mean, how dangerous is this going forward? And what are some of the ramifications of establishing nuclear-powered submarines?
I think the way this is going to be done in close partnership with the US and UK ensures that the US and UK will keep meeting their obligations around not proliferating nuclear weapons. And it's certainly not Australia's intent, as our Prime Minister has said, to obtain nuclear weapons. But nuclear-powered submarines are an extremely powerful military technology, and they do add to the deterrent power in the Indo-Pacific, which is a positive for regional security. The safety and environmental aspects of having nuclear submarines will be carefully managed, building on Australia's capacity to have visits of nuclear warships and submarines already, and with the close technical cooperation with our US and UK partners. So I think the nuclear power aspects of this are entirely manageable within the framework of international obligations and will be really made effective by the powerful partnership of the UK and US with Australia.
Einar, I noticed you were shaking your head there. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that to export highly sensitive nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia is extremely irresponsible double standards. Do you agree?
Well, I have a slightly different take. I mean, Beijing is saying that they don't like this. Obviously, it's going to take 10 years to deliver one of these subs. If they're going to have a fleet, it could take more. And quite frankly, during that time, I think drones will proliferate and become more sophisticated. So for the price of, what did I say, $3.4 billion purse, you could probably create a fleet of a couple 100,000 submersible drones that could literally wait outside harbors and identify any passing submarine, if not cling to them, it'll be laughable in 10 years, quite frankly, from a technology perspective, to have these behemoths wandering around. They'll be virtual dinosaurs. But the issue for China's perspective, Beijing's perspective, is they see this as an entree into a Cold War, as a kind of World War I scenario where the U.S. is creating pacts and obliging itself to get involved. And the danger here is that you set one tinder sets off a World War III, which is what nobody wants. And I would agree with my other counterpart on that. They need to be talked. But you can't talk about saying, oh, we're not starting a Cold War, when obviously you are.
Is there an expectation that if there is some sort of major conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea, that these units would be deployed in the midst of that?
I don't think there's any doubt, really, that if Beijing acted to use force to try and change the status of Taiwan, that America and partners and allies, including Australia, would become involved. That's a matter of national interest and regional security. And I hope that's understood in Beijing. In fact, it's these kinds of scenarios that are leading to this unfortunate need to increase military deterrence. But I wanted to mention one point about the idea that, firstly, nuclear submarines are somehow going to be dated technology. I think that's a scenario, but there's no real evidence to show that's the case. But this partnership, the Australia-US-UK partnership, has nearer term capability benefits too, including in the undersea domain, which is an area of disadvantage for Beijing. So in the interests of not having miscalculations, I wouldn't want Beijing thinking that nearer term additions to capability aren't happening under this partnership. They will.
Michael, just on the discussion around timelines, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd says, and I quote, Australia is being left strategically naked for 20 years because some are suggesting that this submarine program may not be available until 2040. Do you agree with his sentiment that we will be left strategically naked for 20 years?
No, I don't. I think the sooner these submarines can turn up, the better. But as I say, there will be a series of other important capability improvements well before that timeframe, including in the undersea domain. I would be shocked not to see effective unmanned undersea capabilities shared between these important partners. And indeed, also I would expect to see them in the Quad partnership and in important trilaterals like the US, Australia, Japan one, and of course with South Korea. So there's a growing range of capabilities that add to the deterrent picture in our region, and that's well before the first of these submarines turns up.
Einar, China has told the alliance to abandon its Cold War mentality or risk harming its own interests. Is that a direct threat?
No, I mean, they see it as a Cold War. There's going to be a response. It's probably going to be in trade. But I think what it means is that China will pursue its economics more regionally, and that will have an effect. Remember, it's the largest market out there. Australia depends on it. The U.S. Needs it. Europe needs it. Great Britain needs it, or you'd think they did. But I mean, politics has played a role here. You know, obviously, Australia's the prime minister is reeling from this scandal involving one of his ministers and some mysterious money that showed up for his legal funds. Boris has reshuffled his cabinet. Biden is under attack because of the handling of the Afghan war. So, and, you know, things. But there's one other aspect that I want to mention here. I mean, Boris Johnson made this thing about 3 English-speaking nations getting together. I don't know that that's going to sit well, not only with China, but with the rest of ASEAN. This idea that somehow English-speaking people have some sort of a superiority and should be taking on the world and teaching everybody. This smacks of colonialism and racism.
Well, we only